Okay, so thank you very much for coming along today. This is an information session, and so we're very happy to be able to continue to publicise and encourage people to use the Wellcome Trust ISSF Fund. We are also now recording the presentations we give today, because we appreciate that it isn't always convenient for people to come along at these sort of set times, and so these will be made available on the web again for people to be able to catch up out of this particular slot. So I'm going to give a sort of an overview of the fund, reminder for those who perhaps don't know it so well. Then we're going to have a few short little talks, presentations from people involved in different aspects of the ISSF fund. So that includes Claire as one of our early career research fellows, Ruth, who sort of oversees that scheme, Steve King, who hopefully will be here soon to talk about the translation scheme. I will then come back in to say a few words about discipline bridging, and Anna and Marie will also talk about institutional partnerships and public engagement. So hopefully we'll be done within an hour or so, and then have an opportunity to just chat more informally outside over tea and cakes. Okay, so to kick off, the fund was awarded to us in Leicester as part of a competitive process in 2016. We were awarded 1.5 million for 5 years, and that was the maximum that we were allowed to bid for. Our application was considered very strongly. It was well received, and so we have got as much as we could get, which is really based on the amount of Wellcome Trust funding that comes to Leicester. So other places have got more than us, but that really reflects that they are more heavily funded by the Wellcome Trust. Other places have got less than us, even if they may have the same amount of Wellcome Trust funding. So this is 1.5 million over 5 years. That's 300,000 per annum. That's a significant, in effect, internal flexible fund. It's subject to midterm review, but I think we are progressing reasonably well, and so I'd hope that we can put in a good report at that point. But it is worth just noting that we will have to put in a report on how we're using the fund to get those last 2 years of the funding. Very importantly, it's worth knowing that as part of that application there was commitment from the institution to equally match that fund, so actually we have 600,000 per annum and a £3 million total fund. However, it's important to be aware, pragmatically, realistically, that the university doesn't have that sort of spare cash just floating around, and so it really is a matter of us looking to see how colleges, departments, institutes and research centres can direct some of their funds to help support the awards that we're making through the WTISSF, which is why sometimes you'll find things are double badged, for example, between different institutes and the Wellcome Trust ISSF. And I'm growing into an awareness that actually this is a very positive way also to spread the word of the WTISSF, because it means more people get to hear about it through these other schemes. In terms of the purposes of the award, of course it needs to fit both our own Leicester University strategy and also the strategy of the Wellcome Trust. So this is health-related research, but it's health-related research in its broadest possible sense. So this is, of course, biomedical and clinical sciences, but also public health, social sciences, medical humanities, and now exploring into other areas of engineering, space science, physics, and so on, that has relevance to health-related research. So it really is an institutional award, and that was made very apparent when we put in the application, and is an aspect that the Wellcome Trust was very appreciative of. So they are very keen that we use it really as a cross-disciplinary institutional award. And that the second half of that last bullet point, the Wellcome Trust sort of have an aspiration, as I guess we do, that this is going to lead to sustainable change and long-term impact of the university. So it will be disappointing if at the end of this 5-year period we simply can reflect on, well, we funded quite a lot of projects, but it didn't actually really change very much about the way Leicester University works or how it supports its research environment and infrastructure. So we are constantly looking, and this isn't straightforward, but we need to be always thinking about particular schemes and opportunities we can to influence the university as a whole. So we put forward the proposal that our ISSF award would cross discipline, ethnic and social boundaries to promote health, and we identified 4 key strategic research priority areas, and we request that all applications that are made fall within one or more of these areas. That said, we have a very broad interpretation of these areas, and the Wellcome Trust is very happy about that. But clearly, I hope you see that they do match what Leicester is well known for, and also what the Wellcome Trust are known to fund Leicester for. So, for example, precision medicine, Martin Tobin is leading that strand. He's a Wellcome Trust investigator. Structural and chemical biology, jumping down to that one, is led by John Schwabe, who's a Wellcome Trust investigator. So clearly, when we put that application together, we made it clear that we were asking them to support their key Wellcome Trust funded research in Leicester. But equally, there is very strong long-term funding of Leicester in the social sciences, medical humanities, and into areas of sort of joint operation between ethnic health and migration, and so those 2 areas were put forward as well. And as I say, I do feel that almost any area of activity in biomedicine, health-related research can probably come up with a way to fit into one of those areas. I'd feel a bit disappointed if people felt excluded by this scheme. That's the priority areas, and then the other key factor to be aware of is that how we allocate the money is through 5 different funding streams. So if you want to apply for money, you need to apply through one of these streams. Early career researchers, translation innovation, discipline bridges, institutional partnerships, and public engagement. And it's also worth saying that we were sort of given very strong steering guidance by the Wellcome Trust in the sort of areas they were looking for these institutional awards to fit into. So yes, this is what we want to do, but it very much matches up with what they want us to be doing as well. So you're going to hear a little bit about each of those schemes to get a bit more of a flavour of what they're required, but it's important to be aware also that we have open calls coming up in the next few months in each of these areas that you can make applications to. I won't dwell too long either on each of these. I'll just say a few words because you will hear a little bit more from people who are much more involved in each of these schemes. So early career fellowships, this is where the bulk of the money goes. To fund individuals, salary is obviously a substantial commitment. We want this to be our flagship scheme, and so we really are trying to support the development of early career researchers towards getting a competitive application for independence. And we will be judged and measured, really, I think, in large part on how well we manage to promote those early career research fellows into future independence. We have schemes that support both internal and external applicants for different lengths of time in grade 7 or 8. The new call coming up will be particularly focused around internal applicants. There's project costs associated, and then I think what's really important, and maybe Claire will say something more about this, we're trying to build them into a cohort that work together, that get trained together, identify what they see as challenges and for their career and their current research activity, and discuss that together, and I think that is working really well, and perhaps better than any early career researcher cohorts that I know at the University of Leicester. So this is an area, I think, where we are providing a sort of leading example, which the Doctoral College are very keen to sort of mirror and follow up on some of the activities we're doing. So this is just a picture to show the 9 research fellows that were appointed in the first round. I was delighted with the fact that we were able to appoint across such a diverse range of research areas, a mixture of internal, external fellows. All the priority areas were covered, and we received match funding for each of these pretty much from different colleges and institutes. So 3 of them, for example, are co-badged with the Leicester Institute for Structural and Chemical Biology. It's also worth just pointing out there that very handsome fellow in the bottom right-hand corner there. This is Josh van der Hey. I point him out simply because He's in the College of Science and Engineering, and it's really important for us to demonstrate that this fund is as much for science and engineering as it is for life sciences and social science and humanities. And Josh is a great example of somebody who is crossing the disciplinary boundaries. A quick note, again, I don't know if Claire was going to say anything about this, but that cohort has done a fantastic job in putting together plans for a symposium which will be held in Leicester towards the end of the summer, which is not just for Leicester people, but is going to invite people from across the region, the Midlands, and it's going to be open to anybody at Leicester, Warwick, Nottingham or Birmingham, which are the 4 institutions with ISSF funding, who has received funding through this scheme. So it's not just for the fellows, although they'll be doing a lot of the planning and organising, but for others who receive funding, whether it's through a public engagement or discipline bridging scheme, for example. So that's how we're opening it up to anybody who has such funding. And more information will follow. Translation and innovation scheme. So again, we've appreciated that we can spread the word better by joining up with, in effect, the Leicester Drug Discovery and Diagnostics Centre, LD3, who are now part of the Leicester Precision Medicine Institute and have their own calls around translational research projects. And so we have an open call, which we're calling the Spring Translational Support Call, which is going to be jointly funded by the ISSF scheme and by LD3. Now, there could be projects which are more appropriate for one or the other, and so it could be that if they're very much about developing new drugs which need to go towards commercial development, that may be more appropriate for LD3. On the other hand, there may be projects which are more looking at organisation of healthcare systems or patient understandings of illness and engagement with healthcare systems, which we may feel is more appropriate to be supported through the WTISSF scheme. But I think, again, by joining forces here, we're going to be able to simplify things for applicants and also have sort of more clear leverage of funding for both the Wellcome Trust and the MRC, who are supporting the LD3 translational call. Discipline bridges, so what is that? That's about trying to get together with people outside of your own discipline to come up with new ways to approach projects. I put some pretty extreme examples up here. Sociologists and geneticists, historians and epidemiologists, or a team of structural biologists and poets. I like to keep a fairly broad-minded view on this, and it could be that there's somebody who is a sort of hardcore structural biologist who wants to look at the way healthcare interventions are carried out and wants to get together with people, for example, from the BME Centre. And so I think we're not constrained by necessarily having people from opposite ends of the university come into this scheme. We're looking to generate an output. The grant range size is indicated there, and I'll come back to that at the end. We've introduced a novel way to make an application, and that is a short video presentation. In part, again, that is looking at the way, on one hand, that the Wellcome Trust is beginning to shift some of its application schemes. This is about getting people to think about how to make such an application. It's also with the understanding that probably more and more applications in the future will go perhaps via this route than paper applications. And then this bottom point I think is a very exciting development, which really has only come up in the last couple of days. I think people are now clear that there is a Leicester Institute for Advanced Studies, which is featuring prominently for Leicester now as a sort of springboard for new interdisciplinary research led by Lisa Smith. And they are now leading calls around tiger teams and research networks. And there's a new call out for these tiger teams, which is essentially 6-month projects to bring people together to develop a new idea around an area perhaps for overseas funding or pilot data towards a larger strategic application. And so we have teamed up with them within this area of discipline bridges, and we will increase the number of tiger team awards that will be made at the next round, and some of those will be double badged as ISSF, WTISSF and Leicester Institute Advanced Studies tiger teams. Obviously, to get that badging, we would be looking for areas in the health-related activity because it needs to fit the Wellcome Trust remit. But there have been plenty of applications come into that scheme in the first couple of rounds which would fit that remit. So we think we are increasing the opportunities there, and it of course gives us the opportunity to match fund because some of the more standard targeting funding will get badged in this way as well. Institutional partnerships, so there are sort of 3 sub-themes to within this particular scheme. A single slide quickly on each. One is about strategic partnership building, and I see this particularly as being able to pump prime our GCRF and ODA partnerships. So many of you will be aware there was a recent call for spend on international research development, which perhaps was about partnership building, visits to overseas partners, establishing the sort of basis for larger bids to GCRF activity. This can be supported through this scheme as well. So there was a lot of interest in that IRDF scheme. I just want to put out that this scheme could also potentially support those sort of activities. But it doesn't have to be around GCRF ODA, it could be relevant internal UK-based partnership building as well. And it can sponsor inward as well as outward activities. The region, we are very keen to continue to build our relationships with our Midlands partners, some of which receive Wellcome Trust funding, others are simply part of the Midlands Innovation Consortia. And the most practical and obvious way to do that is the understanding that these really have come together in large part in order to tackle the challenging problem of the growing cost of large-scale equipment and infrastructure. And so this scheme is certainly available for people who want to go to one of these other institutions and use some of their kit, but there's a cost involved, so we can cover the cost of that. Equally, if you know of other people who want to come to Leicester and use our kit, we can help cover the cost of that as well. So this is an undersubscribed scheme at the moment, so we're very keen if you know of people who are interested in that possibility. And then the third area of this partnership is a very specific relationship that we're developing with the Crick Institute. Obviously, I think everyone accepts this is the sort of flagship institute, certainly at the moment, in the UK for biomedical research. They are significantly funded by the Wellcome Trust, and the Wellcome Trust again is keen that institutions around the country engage with the Crick and make use of the Crick, and that it's not seen as a sort of sealed box of activity. And so we are inviting people from the Crick to give seminars here and making a good visit out of that, but equally we're openly invited to go down to the Crick to any of their seminar series as well. And again, I don't know if that message has really got out there yet. But as well as their open lectures, they have a series of interest groups, many of which are relevant to the sort of activities we have here at Leicester. Again, you're invited openly to go down to that. And this scheme is really simply to cover your costs for those trips. Okay, and public engagement, again you'll hear more about this in a moment from Marie, but I think this is a scheme which people have got involved in very significantly. I think the majority of our bids have come into this, which is fantastic. Marie's appointment is paid for through the matched funding that comes to the WTISSF. So without that award, we would not have been able to get a full-time appointment into public engagement. So again, we are in a way influencing university policy in a way which I think is very exciting, very positive, and if there's a downside at all, it's that Marie is sort of being dragged in many different directions now as being seen as the person who does public engagement for the university. I think we need to have a badge which says Wellcome Trust on it. But she has great skill in helping people to go beyond the sort of perhaps more traditional thinking of what public engagement is into the more advanced thinking, which certainly the Wellcome Trust are very keen on. I won't go through all of these are just examples of projects we've been funded. If anything, I would just point out that, again, it's very cross-institutional, so certainly people from this college, but people from other colleges as well. Even into the area of translation innovation, you may think, well, this is very biomedical. Actually, we've supported a number of projects which are based in social sciences, and again, this is something the Wellcome Trust were very keen when they made the award, the idea that we would be stimulating innovation within social sciences and humanities. Equality, diversity and inclusion isn't an area which we have specifically set aside a pot of funding for, but is clearly of great importance both to the Wellcome Trust and the University of Leicester. And so I want to make the point that we take this very seriously in terms of the applications that are made, in the way that the bodies that make decisions are sort of put together, and how they consider those applications. And it isn't, our fund is flexible enough that if we identify certain areas, perhaps associated with an Athena Swan bid that's been put together by different departments, which could benefit from Wellcome Trust ISSF funding, then we are open to have discussions around that. So please, you know, again, if you have colleagues who are involved in that activity, wanting to put on particular activities, then need a little bit of pump priming, then the Wellcome Trust ISSF fund can certainly consider that. Just for information really, in terms of governance, this is a long-term institutional internal award, so we're very conscious that we need to be clear and transparent about how this is used. So we have a once-a-year governance board that's chaired by Professor Ian Gillespie. It has representatives from the Wellcome Trust. It has external representatives. The Nottingham WTISSF lead is on that, and it has lay members, including Ruth Tennant, who's the Director of Public Health at Leicester City Council. So there's broad stakeholder involvement well beyond Leicester that looks at how we're spending the money. And again, this is a very sort of intensive analysis of how we are spending that money, making sure we're using it to really try and influence institutional strategy here at Leicester. And then more regularly, in terms of dealing with the calls, putting out new funding schemes, thinking about how the scheme is advertised, whether people are buying into it. There is an executive board which meets on a quarterly basis, and again there's representatives from all colleges on that. And Anna, who set up this meeting today, is overall administering this fund, managing this fund, and so any particular questions you have can be directed to Anna. So again, I won't go through all of these different points. I just want to encourage you, perhaps, if you go and look at the slides that have been recorded afterwards, to have a look through this. And this is just about, above all, I guess, I'm very conscious that we're going to be judged on whether we've used this award to influence institutional strategy. And so these are all areas where we are hoping that our ISSF award does leverage additional funding, raise institutional reputation, influence our metrics across different rankings of the university, and so on. So very much we're looking at the big picture above and beyond simply handing out awards in different project areas, although of course that underpins our research activities. Okay, and so perhaps the most important point to make, and the reason for having this refresher workshop presentation today, is the fact there are new calls out. There's a new call out for Early Career Research Fellows, deadline 1st of May. This Spring Translational Award, in conjunction with LD3 I mentioned, also deadline 1st of May. This partnership we have with the Leicester Institute of Advanced Studies for jointly badged Tiger teams, we've left the deadline as 1st of June because that's what's been advertised by the Institute for Advanced Studies. So we simply encourage you to put in bids, and having talked to Lisa Smith, there may well be an extra little section on there where you can flag if your application you think would fit into this particular scheme. But it doesn't have to. Of course, there are other Tiger teams which aren't co-badged. And then we have additional larger pots with a particular deadline of the 1st of May, both discipline bridging and public engagement. But it's very important to know that apart from early career research fellowships, all the other schemes are permanently open to small scale level applications. So it's not a once only sort of annual call and that's it. If you have ideas, please come and discuss them with the leads, discuss them with Anna or myself, but we can often pump prime projects at any time of the year through this mechanism. And very last of all, just to point you to, I think, an excellent website that Anna's put up. You can simply search for Leicester ISSF into Google, and it will quickly take you to this page. So if you're not quite sure how to find it within the university, just Google it and you'll find it very quickly. But it highlights very nicely the different priority areas, funding streams, how to apply, and other activities going on, such as this symposium I mentioned earlier. Okay, so that's an overview of the scheme, how it's working, how it's developing, and I think it's really important that you see it as developing from if you came along to the launch a year ago. And now we're going to have a few short little presentations to say a little bit more about some of those key schemes which have open calls. So I believe, Ruth, you're going to come up and say a few more words about early career research fellowships. Shall I close that up?
Yes.
Are you on a PowerPoint?
I've got one on your desktop.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Ruth Carter. I lead this scheme together with Martin Hallowell and Steve King from CASA. And I think Andrew has introduced this to you, and I'd like you to hear the maximum from Claire Lawson, so I won't take too much time here. We are running this scheme for the May 1st deadline only for internal applicants. We're going to define internal applicants as people who have been active either as a student or as an employee or as a collaborator with University of Leicester Laboratories. Can be on main site or a hospital laboratory affiliated with University of Leicester. So we're going to be, it's internal, but it's soft internal. These obviously are to fund investigators to try to become independent and to achieve success in fellowship applications following on from these awards. I think we've covered these points earlier. So I would encourage you to either have a discussion with me or to have a discussion with one of the priority leads as you're preparing an application, if you're thinking of doing that, because you'd not want to miss out on the remit of the various priority areas, and that those discussions can help shape your application. You have now about a month to do that. These are the list of the leads for your information again. We obviously are going to ask you to design a novel research project of your own, and that forms part of your application. You'll also need to be thinking about shaping that quite soon now with the May 1st deadline looming. So you'll obviously develop these research proposals during the course of your fellowship, further during the course of your fellowship, and Claire will talk about the project that she's developed and has already received an ECR fellowship from our ISSF, and working, of course, eventually toward independent funding. You'll be expected to do any of the normal things that an aspiring academic would do, publishing, going to conferences, etc. And the flexible funding in the ISSF to support your project can help you to do some of these things. Likewise, you can tap into any of the other schemes that the ISSF offer to supplement the 15K available through the ECR mechanism directly. So again, to reiterate what's available, what's on offer here, there's a salary support for your salary at grade 7 or 8, depending on your previous experience, and that will run for a period of 12 months, as these are considered internal fellowships. We have had cases where we've co-funded people for a longer period at 50%. That is also possible, so we are flexible with this. But in terms of the FTE that we're going to be funding, it's a 12-year or 12-month full-time FTE. We support justified project costs up to about 15,000 per year, up to a maximum of 15,000 per year. As I said, that can be supplemented either with other outside funds that you may get on your own, or with other ISSF mechanism fundings, or other university fundings. You'll benefit from mentorship from senior colleagues all the way through your award. As Andrew said, we're holding about approximately monthly meetings with our this year's cohort of fellows, and they are not only working on a seminar but also discussing career development activities and training opportunities. You have every access, as any academic would, to core university research infrastructure and support, as I said, from other university offices, and including in departments. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Claire Lawson, who will tell you a little bit about her WT ISSF Early Career Researcher Fellowship project. And I will be available afterwards to speak to people who are interested in this.
Thanks, Ruth. Can I first just ask if I can hold you to the 12-year funding that you mentioned? Okay. I think you did correct it quite quickly. Okay. Thanks, Ruth. So I'm Claire. I'm really just 3 months into a 2-year external early career fellowship. So I just want to talk to you just for 5 or so minutes, really, just on a bit about my background, my research that I'm developing, what attracted me really to the early career fellowship, and where I hope this will take me in terms of research independence. So I'm a cardiology nurse. I've been a lecturer in nursing for 15 years. Now, for the past 5 years, I've been developing a research programme on cardiovascular disease. So earlier last year, I completed an NIHR doctoral fellowship and PhD in the area really of big data. So I was using large national and international databases of routinely collected information in order to understand clinical life course epidemiology. So the onset and progression of disease in populations. So my interest is cardiovascular disease, still the single biggest killer in Europe. And the research that I'm developing really is trying to understand the difference in the onset and progression of cardiovascular disease in different population groups. And this is from sort of etiology or risk factors through to the clinical presentation of cardiovascular disease, through to end-stage disease, so heart failure, and beyond that to death. I'm interested in the broad set of factors really that might influence and underpin that progression. So up until I came to the Wellcome Trust, really I'd focused in on the end of this trajectory looking at heart failure and prognosis. And I really focused in on clinical and sort of healthcare or treatment factors that might influence prognosis. The particular clinical sort of factors that I'm interested in is comorbidity. So in heart failure patients have a huge burden of different chronic diseases at the same time as heart failure. And I'm interested in how these comorbidities impact on outcomes in heart failure, but more specifically how we can actually stratify risk within these comorbid groups in order to improve the precision of heart failure prognosis. And just to give you a very quick example of a study that I've just completed, this was looking at a sort of sample of UK general practice patients with heart failure using routine data. Within that group, I identified those who have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, but I was interested in how I stratify risk within that group, so use the routine data to define measures of, pseudo measures, if you like, of COPD severity, so using drug-based measures, using physiological measures, so lung impairment. And I found that if we could stratify that group by these measures, we could actually find a significant difference in risk, and that's of hospital admission and of mortality. When those measures were added to a prognostic model for heart failure, it actually improved model performance quite drastically. So this brings me up to where I was in terms of when I saw the Wellcome Trust Fellowship advertised. I really was keen to try and broaden the research beyond the doctoral fellowship to try and now take a step back and understand the progression to heart failure. I also wanted to understand a broader set of factors that might influence that. And I also wanted to think about how I might move the epidemiology towards developing interventions. So when I saw the Wellcome Trust advertised, I was really quite excited that 3 of those strategic priorities of the Trust really met with what I was trying to do. So ethnic health and migration provides a really good opportunity to compare groups who not only genetically might differ, but also likely culturally differ according to a range of those factors. In terms of moving this forward to developing interventions through the fellowship and beyond that to a postdoc fellowship application, I want to develop interventions for primary and secondary prevention that are tailored to different groups. So this really fit with precision medicine, and also as those patient studies come on board, social science and humanities. So in terms of where I'm up to now in the work that I'm doing under the Wellcome Trust remit, just give you literally 2 slides, 2 quick examples of the studies that I'm undertaking. The first one, in trying to understand the onset and progression of cardiovascular disease, will be using a national database, the Clinical Practice Research Data Link. And you may have heard of this database recently because Leicester have recently got the licence to use CPRD. But this is a 10% sample of all general practice patients across the UK. This data set is linked to hospital episode statistics, so that's all hospital admissions in England. And within the HES data, there's really good ethnicity recording. So within this data set, I'll be able to stratify the population via ethnicity. And we have roughly 7% South Asian population, 4% African Caribbean, and the rest Caucasian. So what I want to do is follow this group up to look at from cardiovascular risk factors through to clinical presentation, and then on to an acute event such as a heart attack, and on to heart failure. And using certain statistical techniques or methodologies actually take account of all the different factors that might change over time during this progression. So that's one of the studies that I'm currently doing. The second study, I've got a real interest in, at the point of heart failure onset, what comorbidities and clinical and patient factors come together or group together, cluster together more frequently than we would expect by chance. So I'm interested in what those clusters are. I'm interested in whether they differ by ethnicity, and I'm interested in what the outcomes of those clusters are. So for this study, I'm using an American database, the National Inpatient Sample. Within this data, there's roughly 20% of all admissions across 49 out of the 50 states in America, which is roughly 10 million admissions a year. So within that data, I'll identify the group that has heart failure. It gives a real opportunity to study other ethnic groups or another ethnicity demographic. And within this data, there's roughly 24% African American, 10% Hispanic, about 4 or 5% East Asian, and then the rest American Caucasian population. So I'll be able to identify the clusters within those ethnic groups and then follow them forward to look at things like hospital utilisation and costs. So that gives you a very quick overview of the research that I'm doing. And hopefully I'll be able to put across really how this fits in with three of the themes, so ethnic health and migration, precision medicine, and social sciences and humanities. But one of the really, I think, strengths of coming to this fellowship for me is being able to work across disciplines. So this work is in collaboration with the cardiovascular theme of the BRC, the Diabetes Research Centre, and also the East Midlands Centre for Black and Minority Ethnic Health. I guess adding to that, and some of what Andrew and Ruth alluded to, is coming together as a group of fellows. We come from very diverse backgrounds, so we have history, we have biology, we have microbiology, we have epidemiology, all coming together. And you may think, well, what do we have to talk about? Well, actually, in those monthly meetings, it came clear very quickly, really, that we'd all got very shared learning requirements in terms of taking our research forward. So together as a group, we've been able to define what our research needs are, what our learning deficits are, and how we're going to try and overcome them during the time of our fellowships. So we bring people into our monthly meetings who can actually talk to us and develop and teach us new skills in order to take that forward. As Andrew has said, we're organising the symposium, which will be coming up, which is quite a collaborative effort. And sort of in between those monthly meetings, we also have a Google website where we interact regularly. So it's really sort of great opportunity, really, in order to how we, as a multidisciplinary group, come together to talk in one voice. And that voice will help us then with public engagement and with talking to the lay public about our research. The final comment I'll say, really, is that this has provided a really important gap for me, or filled an important gap in terms of the doctoral fellowship, and then working towards a really robust and competitive application for a postdoc fellowship, which will be part of the remit of the work that I'm doing, is to develop that fellowship using a sort of multidisciplinary team. So that's me, so thank you for listening.
So 5 minutes on institutional partnerships. I'm going to bring up the web page for this. So I think this is a really exciting opportunity within the overall scheme. because we've got, as we've already, Andrew's alluded to, our links with the Crick Institute in London, and then we've got these opportunities regionally to open up the doors to see what equipment is in the region that we could make use of, or I think it's very important to consider getting people into Leicester as well. And also this opportunity for partnership building, and I'm going to just use an example of one of the projects that we've funded already, which was in the GCRF area, and it did enable one of our colleagues, Andrea Cooper, who couldn't make it today, but she was able to go out to Chennai, and we were able to give her some funding to do that. And on the website you can see some of her pictures from her visit out there, and that's really helped her collaboration with her partners out there, and I believe there's going to be interactions and collaborations coming from this. So in those 3 different areas, I think they haven't had enough applications yet, and I'd love to see more applications coming to those areas. Let's get people down to the Crick, to their seminars. I've been down there myself. Andrew, you're here, brilliant. And it was a wonderful experience. They're extremely welcoming. As I said, you just need to show your Leicester badge and you're in, and they'll even show you around and let you see some of the facilities whilst you're there. We are in the process of getting more speakers here. We're hoping to get one in before the summer, and we've definitely got one lined up for the autumn as well. The equipment sharing opportunity, I think, is really important. You know, we've got some fantastic equipment here, and let's go and explore what we've got in the region. And this is money sitting, waiting. You've got a simple application form to fill out, actually. And what I thought I would just do, because we haven't looked at the application form this afternoon yet, is to just bring it up, because it really is a simple application form, and it's very similar across all the schemes. The only one with the fellowships, of course, you've got to do a job application as well, but let's have a look at equipment sharing there. Nice, easy form to fill out. We ask you some obvious questions around. We're keen to know what you want to get out of doing this, of course. We want to know how it's going to fit to our priority areas. So some basic questions like that, and I'm on hand to help you fill in the form if need be. We want some basic ideas about your budget, a short CV. As you can see, you know, that's literally a couple of pages. Open all year round, as I said, for this scheme as well. So please, can I encourage you to spread the word on this? I've been sitting there just sort of brainstorming, thinking about who else I can try and bring this to the attention of, because I think this is a really fabulous opportunity, this particular part of the scheme. That's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
You put this on here or not? Can't see it. Discipline bridges.
Do you have it on the stick or not?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll bring it across on the stick. And we certainly did try to. I'll just take that one out. Perfect. Thank you.
Am I? Okay. I'll try that again.
It's at the top.
Is it?
See at the top of the screen there.
That's it. Very good. Okay. Okay. So this is a translational funding stream, which Alistair Gore leads, and I sort of hang around looking at the social sciences and arts humanities bit of this. This is a generic presentation, but I'll just go through a few of the slides which are important for the Wellcome Trust part of this funding. The idea is that we wanted to bring together all of the translational activities and funding into one pot. So the first time we ran this, we used Wellcome Trust funding in isolation. And of course, we came up across all of the barriers that you would normally come up across in the university, which is that RED's got some money, LD3's got some money, colleges may have some money, and actually we never spend it to the most useful effect. So we tried to bring translation into one place with one application form, and we're going to be using the LD3 application forms. So if I can just scroll down. So the idea is that we are interested in providing translational funding to projects which go from, if I crudely style it, I've got a good idea and I need to do something with it, through to I've got a good proven concept that is going to come and make a big difference. And that in the biomedical sciences is familiar to you, but maybe not in the arts, humanities and social sciences. And so we've got this graphic to talk about the journey of those sorts of projects. But we genuinely are interested in everything from start to almost finish. This is the LD3 Confidence in Concept Award. You should be familiar with this. Alistair Gore keeps telling me, and so I don't need to spend any time on it. But what we've tried to do in the Wellcome Trust ISSF bit of this is also to make bridges from biomedical sciences into social sciences and arts and humanities. And we've been interested in these sorts of themes that you can see on the board behind me, and I'm going to give you a few examples of work projects in just a second. But translation for us means something different. It means changing policy and practice, not saving lives per se. Although I've got a project that might just do that, as you'll see. So you've got two bits of the scheme: the biomedical bit and the arts, humanities, and social sciences. And we're interested in projects across that range, and we're particularly interested in any projects that combine the two of those sorts of disciplinary perspectives. So from a biomedical perspective and from an arts humanities perspective, we're interested in this range of activities, but we're also interested in ideas from you. So if there's something that we haven't thought of that really deserves funding, that can make a real difference, then we're interested in hearing from it. And Alistair's take is generally, if it's a really good idea, we'll go out of our way to try and find funding, even if it doesn't exactly fit our core. So if in doubt, put it into us for the deadline, and we will then seek the money to help out. So in a biomedical sense, the take is we want to go from bench to bedside and back again, and you've heard this before many times. And Alistair keeps beating my head with it every time I see him. So this is the model for biomedical research. And we want to end up with projects that do these range of things. And they talk to some of the stuff that Andrew was talking about when I came in. We have to change something. We have to change something because the university wants us to change something. We have to change something because we want to make money from it, maybe. And we have to change something above all because Andrew, as PI, has to report that we've changed something by the time we get halfway through this grant. So we will be supporting people in translational research, both financially and otherwise, because we have to make the case for it. So these are some of the projects and some of the areas that are of interest to us, but they are not exclusive. If you've got a good idea, then Alistair and we're all around on email all the time, and we will talk to you about how you shape a project for the 1st of May. So here's a few of the areas that we're interested in. And I just want to give you a trio of successful projects. This is the one that may save lives, even though it's not essentially biomedical. And this is Liz Anderson in Health Science and Simon Bennett. Simon Bennett looks at how airlines don't end up crashing all the time. And he looks at a whole series of preparatory checks and balances that are put in place to make sure everything is done as it should be, nothing ever goes wrong. And he's at the forefront of this in the aviation industry. He went to Liz Anderson and Liz Anderson went to him at the same time to work out whether we could do this in a healthcare situation, whether you can do it in hospitals to stop accidents. Accidents which cost billions in terms of compensation and ruin lives. And so they're trying to translate something from the airline industry, something that Simon Bennett has authored, into a healthcare context in our local context. So it fills all of the gaps. It can link to the ethnic health, it can link to the local, it can link to the translation and changing stuff. And of course it's collaborative, and we really like collaborative projects like this. Here's a second one, which is Simon Wagner and John Schwaber, and again, this is non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. It speaks for itself, more or less. And finally, David Cousins and the validation of blood biomarkers in this case. So you can see, just from a few examples, the range of stuff that we're interested in, and we will do everything we can to both spend our money and spend other people's money on your behalf if you come to us with concepts. So we're open to talking, we're open from the 1st of May, but if you've got an idea, talk to Alistair Gore or myself. I'll talk lucidly about most things, but to no great effect perhaps, whereas Alistair Gore may actually know something about the biomedical end of things. But so we've got the joint project, one-stop shop for translation from everything, this might be a decent idea, to we're about to make a breakthrough. So come to us and we will help. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Steve. So you're back to me again, and just for a couple of minutes to talk about the discipline bridge scheme. So this is really where it's most overtly, most obviously about trying to initiate and facilitate cross-disciplinary research, exploring projects from new angles through collaboration with other disciplines. Scale, typically sort of very short to 3 months, could be longer, and this is the sort of range of activity. Again, £500 or less, open all the time. There are specific calls for larger amounts of money, and of course open across the university. This is a scheme which has been particularly picked up very well, I think, within social sciences, arts, humanities. That they may be better at thinking sort of in a cross-disciplinary manner than perhaps we in life sciences are, but maybe we're better than those in science and engineering. I don't know. We have yet to receive an application from that area, but I do think we need to push them, having just had a very stimulating workshop in the area of space science and how that could be applied to health-related activities. So I think there's good opportunity there. What I do want to just talk about really for 2 minutes is one particular project as a fantastic example of what this scheme can support. Again, this fits within really two of the key priority areas. One of those is ethnic health and migration, the other is social sciences and medical humanities. And the project is called Diversity, Ethnicity and Voice, and it's about enabling women to speak up about safety concerns in pregnancy in the postnatal period. And it's being led by a health scientist, Nicola McIntosh, and this project is in combination with an artist, Lorna Dunn. Now, Nicola McIntosh is a relatively recent recruitment to Leicester, and prior to this she was at King's in London, and while she was there she really started this work in the area of social science, looking at what are the challenges for women, particularly in their first pregnancy, in terms of understanding what might be normal and what might not be normal, and not really knowing what to do in different circumstances and whether they should be bothering the health services, those busy people down at the hospitals and GP practices, with what may not be any problem, but maybe. And it's really about exploring the individual challenges that situation presents. Now, in Leicester, the collaboration has been with the Attenborough Arts Centre, but also particularly with the Centre for BME Health. And it's about extending that original work that was done in London, that was not focused on any particular audience. It was there obviously for pregnant women and their families and friends, but not within any particular societal situation. And so the idea is that, is this applicable? Is this short video that has been presented, I won't go through it, but you can find it on the web and look through it. Is this applicable to situations, particularly with our local ethnic communities? So what they have done is to really extend this project into looking at Leicester's South Asian community. So they've set up focus groups, they've had interviews with members of those communities, both pregnant women, their families, community leaders, GP practices, and the aim is to really sort of adapt the film that they'd already developed in a way that is more meaningful to those communities. And they have also, by collaborating with this artist, developed a number of sort of static imagery, which can be obviously used in public places. It can also be used in exhibitions, and we looked at this in a recent sort of end of project event that was held in the Attenborough Arts Centre. And as I say, it's about both conceptual understanding and relevance of the piece of work that was generated for this particular community, but also interestingly exploring new areas. For example, how do people make contact with health services? It's not always face-to-face or through visits to GP surgeries. It can be as much through apps on your phone, through message boards, through virtual communities. And so it's about coming up with the right mechanisms, the most appropriate mechanisms. Of course, it's a sort of short-term project which is meant to have a sort of defined goal, and really there was a conclusion that self-diagnosis and help-seeking are indeed social and relational practices, and what is good for one community isn't going to be best for another, and so it's about defining how to adapt that in a most sort of pragmatic manner. The publications involved, public engagement events have been held, and there are clear opportunities for now larger strategic grant applications to both the NIHR, who funded the original film production, but also Wellcome Trust and the ESRC Research Council. And they have some very exciting plans around adapting that film to other groups of women, and thinking about developing a support package that could be given out to newly pregnant women and their families to work alongside the film. So that, I think, is a fantastic example of the sort of cross-disciplinary projects that could be supported through this particular scheme. Okay, and I'll pass over now to Marie, who will just talk about the last scheme, which is public engagement.
Thank you. Right, so I'm just going to use our webpage to talk through what there is accessible through the scheme. Actually, I've just realised it's already loaded here. So, I think Andrew gave a really nice overview, so I'm just going to recap on what was already said. But basically, there are three main things you can access through the public engagement scheme. One of them is me, so I'm here to support developing ideas for engagement activities that will actually support your research area. And I really enjoy that. I'd really encourage you to come and talk to me if that's something you're interested in. Secondly is seed awards for engagement activities and ideas. And again, similar to what Steve said, we're open to just ideas. I think I've got an idea that might be good to try, right down to actually we've done something like this before, but now we want to kind of see if we can change that and adapt that and make it kind of bigger and better. We're kind of open to those sorts of things. And then thirdly, we can cover the costs of external public engagement training. So I don't think we've really had any applications for this yet, so I'd really strongly consider you to think about that and do put in an application if there's some training that you would like to go on externally. So we have a new application process. So I will just get that up, open. So what we've done is, in our first year of the public engagement scheme, we've been very open. We've used kind of the template created for all of the schemes, and something that we've realised is that actually going back to the kind of longer term sustainable things that we want to be changing within our culture here through the ISSF funding is to develop tools and ways of thinking about engagement that will help people create better sort of high quality engagement activities. So this new sort of form will hopefully help you do that, because it kind of doubles up as a bit of a project planning tool. So we ask you to simply put your project title, the applicant names, the target audiences, start and end date, the budget that you're asking for. So we have a rolling deadline of up to £500, and then we have our next deadline of the 1st of May for anything between £500 and £3,000. And then we also ask you to think about the ISSF priority area. And then you just have these 5 columns, and this can be really brief. These can just be notes. We're not asking you to put, you know, big chunks of text here necessarily, but we just want to get a feel for the kinds of things that you're putting into your project, and who you're bringing together, what you're going to do with it, what you would like to get out of it physically, whether that's a web page, some artwork, a film, whatever that might be, by bringing people together. And then the longer term outcomes, you know, what sort of behavioural changes are you wanting to get out of this activity? Do you want it to help create better links between researchers and specific community groups? Are you hoping this will actually influence the next stage in your research area? We're just asking you to have a little bit of a think about that. And then the last one, I think, is maybe the most challenging one to think about, which is what are you assuming, what you taking for granted maybe, in order for this to actually happen? So the example I've put here, you know, are you assuming, for example, that the activity you want to do is actually the best way of engaging with those people and getting some open dialogue about, you know, discussions around the research that's happening and how that might be interpreted by different people? So I will just also mention that. So I'm Public Engagement Manager for the College of Life Sciences, but I also manage this public engagement scheme, and I'm on the assessment panel along with Elizabeth Hurren, who's in the Social Sciences College, and Kaz Kramer, who's in our college and has the role of Head of Public Engagement. So the last thing to mention is that, again, through the first year of having the scheme open, we've learnt a lot along that first year as to who's applied and the kind of things that they've wanted to do. So what I've also done is create an FAQs document. So I won't go through this in any great detail right now, but who can apply for Seed Awards? What is public engagement? What do we mean in this specific context of the Wellcome Trust ISSF scheme here? You know, can I ask for funds retrospectively? Excuse me. What should the purpose be? Who are the public? All of these kinds of things that we found that people kind of quite often ask me in the lead up to submitting an application. So I think I will leave it there, but otherwise just to say that we've had a really fantastic range of projects that we've been able to fund in our first year, and we would just like to see more, you know, interesting ideas kind of come our way. And we also, similar to Steve, we never turn anything down necessarily. It's quite often something that might become a work in progress, and then people then later, after having some consultation time with me, might sort of adapt how they're looking at it and then submit at a later date. And if for any reason there is, it's not something we can directly fund from the public engagement scheme, then I'm certainly here to help identify other sources of funding for that activity that you might want to do. Okay, so thank you, I'll leave it there.
Thanks so much indeed, Marie. So that's all for the presentations. I would be happy to answer questions in this forum, but I should say that I think most of those of us who are running the scheme will be around outside over the coffee break with tea and cakes, and so you might find it easy to ask out there. Hopefully this recording has worked, so I'll be looking very quickly at whether it's available on the website, and then we'll certainly circulate the fact that it is available to others, but please also do talk to your colleagues. And hopefully, while some of the schemes have been very successful and very active, there are other schemes which, you know, we would certainly be keen to try and get more activity and applications in. And we're also keen to be pushing into areas of the university which perhaps this is still rather lacking in transparency, and perhaps science and engineering is the most obvious of those areas. Okay, so does anyone have a burning question they'd like to ask in this forum? And I'm happy to answer that. Otherwise, let's close then, and please do stick around for a drink and chat with colleagues afterwards. Thank you very much.
Interactive very extensively.